Hello, hello. Sorry about looking a little bit ghosty. I actually ended up doing a last minute update to OBS, which is the broadcast software I use, and there wasn't enough time left to disconnect some things and then reconnect them software wise, which would have got me back to where it normally is. So I'm just going to have a wee twiddle with the camera settings and see if I can improve it. Okay? Just stay there. Um, and hopefully it will make a bit of a difference. Oopsie, not quite so much on that. See if that will help. Yes, I'm looking from one monitor to the other. That's kind of going to do it, I think. And yes, we've got the sparkly bits around the edge of the hair. Because I don't have a hair light, which would light up my hair so it shows up really well without actually having the weirdo stuff going on around the edges with the green screening. I will also see if this helps. Kind of. We'll see. This is what it is. It is what it is. Right. So, hi, how are you all? Hope you're really enjoying your week this week. Mine's just been a little bit too much of everything so far, and it's only Wednesday. But that's okay. Life is like that. That's just kind of sometimes how it works, isn't it? What else? Have I been doing anything interesting? I got some washing done the other day, the laundry, hung it out. Hubby brought it inside, then put it all away. Folded it and left it for everyone to put their own stuff away. Apparently, I'm dropping lots of frames. I don't know why. There's something up with my system. Probably because my processor is not handling things well at the moment. I will chat. You will have dropped frames, which means that it gets a little bit. And hopefully it'll settle down soon. We'll see. What else has been going on? I made myself some lunch, but I haven't eaten it yet. I suppose I could introduce myself to everybody who's new here. Hi, I'm Jev. I read old-fashioned children's books because they're lots of fun, but a little bit quirky, just because they look at the world differently to what we do now, which is not a bad thing because it helps us to actually expand our perceptions. I do have 3 tips, 3 things that I suggest you bring when you're coming to listen to my story times. They are water to drink and your favourite drink if you've got something else as well. So I've got water and I've also got a Nippy's iced coffee. Sorry, trying to get at an angle where it's going to show you without getting reflections. Water to drink plus maybe a favourite drink, something to snack on. So I have some butter fried potato and I also have some what the family calls plastic cheese. Yes, it's all weird and changing. My computer thinks it's green because the green screen. And also somewhere comfortable to sit. And so I have a seat which is reasonably comfortable and it's kind of the right height for what I'm sitting and doing at the moment without crashing into things, because my normal one has a big back on it and it gets in the way and all that sort of stuff. So, and I've got a weird thing going on back here. There you go, that's a bit better. I'm just going to have one more tweak with my camera, see what happens. And then the other thing is I've got a few docs missing on the surroundings for what I'm doing, which is a bit of a nuisance. I'm not quite sure why it's doing that. It's just, I'm just going to turn off the picture behind you and you will see what it really looks like. And then it will come back after I've made some tweaks. So just hold your horses. There you go. going to move that out of the way and have a look at this and go, that colour. Okay, thank you. Turn that back on. And it didn't really help with the hair at all. Oh well, too bad, too bad. We'll see if this will help. Peculiar, most peculiar. Mind you, I did notice today that the strange, very strange, that my camera controller program was a little bit off too, which is probably what started all this part of it, but it didn't start the things to do with the update on the computer. So here we go. Let's get on with the story. We're currently reading Emily of New Moon, which is another one of L.M. Montgomery's orphan stories. Not as famous as Anne of Green Gables, but that's not a problem. Anne is not necessarily everybody else's cup of tea. There are some of us who just prefer something a little bit less, not feisty. I think it's probably because some of us prefer a story that's not quite as long and angst-ridden, which the Anne books can get a little bit that way because there's just so many of them. But if you love Anne, that's great. Go for it. Enjoy them. I probably won't be reading any of the Anne books just because we've got other things we can read as well. And this is the story that actually I connected with more when I was growing up, rather than the Anne of Green Gables and other ones in the series. Well, at least my microphone's working, I suppose. Shouldn't complain about that. Anything else going on? What else is going on in the story? Ellen Montgomery, Lucy Maud Montgomery, actually felt more connected to this story than the Anne stories, and I think you can pick it when you're listening because it feels like a lot of parts of it are autobiographical. Not that she was writing her own story, because I don't believe she was at all. I think more the creative perceptions and experiences that Emily has in the story were things that she related to herself, as opposed to the standard, the stuff that goes on in Anne, plus some of her other stories as well. And my goodness, my computer is doing some really weird stuff today. I have no idea why. The network meter is telling me that it's just like there's a major earthquake going on, except it's more network connection. The drives meter for once is being relatively calm, but the processor is like, I have a brain and my brain is very, very full and I don't know if I can cope with doing anything for you. Thank you very much. Bye. So we'll just see how we go. We'll just see how we go, and hopefully it will get itself sorted out as we go along. Yes, I really should have got the update done a lot sooner in the day, but there's just been too much happening. I'm sorry. Anyway, we'll carry on with the actual story, and you can ignore all this chatter beforehand. Yeah, sorry, just one more last look before I get on with actually reading, hoping that the CPU usage is going to go down a bit so that poor little computer can cope. Anyway, here we go, shall we? Emily of New Moon by L.M. Montgomery, more famously known for writing Anne of Green Gables and the sequels. And we are reading Chapter 8, Trial by Fire. Oh, what's going to happen? Ooh. Aunt Elizabeth drove Emily to school the next morning. Aunt Laura had thought that since there was only a month before vacation, it was not worthwhile for Emily to start school. Yes, there were quotation marks around that phrase in the book. But Aunt Elizabeth did not yet feel comfortable with a small niece skipping around New Moon, poking into everything insatiably, and was resolved that Emily must go to school to get her out of the way. Emily herself, always avid for new experiences, was quite keen to go. But for all that, she was seething with rebellion as they drove along. Emily has not been to school before. She was educated by her dad. Aunt Elizabeth had produced a terrible gingham apron and an equally terrible gingham sunbonnet from somewhere in the New Moon garret, which is like a storage attic, and made Emily put them on. The apron was a long sack-like garment, high in the neck, with sleeves, not like a modern apron that's just sort of like tied around your waist. Those sleeves were the crowning indignity. Emily had never seen any little girl wearing an apron with sleeves. She rebelled to the point of tears over wearing it. But Aunt Elizabeth was not going to have any nonsense. Emily saw the Murray look then, and when she saw it, she buttoned her rebellious feelings tightly up in her soul and let Aunt Elizabeth put the apron on her. Emily is wearing her morning clothes, which is the black merino dress out of reasonably cheap fabric that the housekeeper that used to be in the house where she lived with her father had made for her for the funeral and so on. And Aunt Elizabeth has organised some replacement clothes that would suitably express mourning, white dress but with a black sash. But they haven't arrived and they are for best clothes, and so she had said that Emily was to wear her new mourning clothes for things like school, day-to-day wear. And probably because it wasn't going to be a waste of money to the same extent, and also it would get some usage instead of throwing it away, because Aunt Elizabeth isn't really the sort to just throw something away. We'll carry on. It was one of your mother's aprons when she was a little girl, Emily, said Aunt Laura. Oh, no, sorry, that was Elizabeth. It was one of your mother's aprons when she was a little girl, Emily, said Aunt Laura comfortingly and rather sentimentally. Then, said Emily, uncomforted and unsentimental, I don't wonder she ran away with father when she grew up. Aunt Elizabeth finished buttoning the apron and gave Emily a none too gentle push away from her. Put on your sunbonnet, she ordered. Oh, please, Aunt Elizabeth, don't make me wear that horrid thing. Aunt Elizabeth, wasting no further words, picked up the bonnet and tied it on Emily's head. Emily had to yield, but from the depths of the sunbonnet issued a voice, defiant though tremulous. Anyway, Aunt Elizabeth, you can't boss God, it said. Aunt Elizabeth was too cross to speak all the way to the schoolhouse. She introduced Emily to Mrs. Brownell and drove away. School was already in, so Emily hung her sunbonnet on the porch nail and went to the desk Miss Brownell assigned her. She had already made up her mind that she did not like Miss Brownell and never would like her. Miss Brownell had the reputation in Blairwater of being a fine teacher, due mainly to the fact that she was a strict disciplinarian and kept excellent order. She was a thin, middle-aged person with a colourless face, prominent teeth, most of which she showed when she laughed, and cold, watchful grey eyes, colder even than Aunt Ruth's. Emily felt as if those merciless agate eyes saw clean through her to the core of her sensitive little soul. Emily could be fearless enough on occasion, but in the presence of a nature which she instinctively felt to be hostile to hers, she shrank away in something that was more repulsion than fear. She was a target for curious glances all the morning. The Blairwater school was large, and there were at least 20 little girls of about her own age. Emily looked back curiously at them all, and thought the way they whispered to each other behind hands and books when they looked at her very ill-mannered. She felt suddenly unhappy and homesick and lonesome. She wanted her father and her old home and her dear things she loved. The New Moon girl is crying, whispered a black-eyed girl across the aisle, and then came a cruel little giggle. What is the matter with you, Emily? Said Miss Brownell suddenly and accusingly. Emily was silent. She could not tell Miss Brownell what the matter was with her, especially when Miss Brownell used such a tone. When I ask one of my pupils a question, Emily, I am accustomed to having an answer. Why are you crying? There was another giggle from across the aisle. Emily lifted miserable eyes and in her extremity fell back on a phrase of her father's. "It is a matter that concerns only myself," she said. A red spot suddenly appeared in Miss Brownell's sallow cheek. Her eyes gleamed with cold fire. "You will remain in during recess as a punishment for your impertinence," she said, but she left Emily alone for the rest of the day. Emily did not in the least mind staying in at recess, for, acutely sensitive to her environment as she was, she realised that, for some reason she could not fathom, the atmosphere of the school was antagonistic. The glances cast at her were not only curious, but ill-natured. She did not want to go out to the playground with those girls. She did not want to go to school in Blair Water, but she would not cry any more. She sat erect and kept her eyes on her book. Suddenly, a soft, malignant hiss came across the aisle. "Miss Pridey! Miss Pridey!" Emily looked across at the girl. Large, steady, purplish-grey eyes gazed into beady, twinkling black ones, gazed unquailingly, with something in them that cowed and compelled. Black eyes wavered and fell, their owner covering her retreat with another giggle and toss of her short braid of hair. "I can master her," thought Emily with a thrill of triumph. But there is a strength in numbers, and at noon hour Emily found herself standing alone on the playground, facing a crowd of unfriendly faces. Children can be the most cruel creatures alive. They have the herd instinct of prejudice against any outsider, and they are merciless in its indulgence. Emily was a stranger, and one of the proud Murrays, 2 counts against her. And there was about her, small and ginghamed and sunbonneted as she was, a certain reserve and dignity and fineness that they resented. And they resented the level way she looked at them with that disdainful face under cloudy black hair, instead of being shy and drooping as became an interloper on probation. "You are a proud one," said Black Eyes. "Oh my, you may have buttoned boots, but you are living on charity." Emily had not wanted to put on the buttoned boots. She wanted to go barefoot, as she had always done in summer, but Aunt Elizabeth had told her, Aunt Elizabeth had told her that no child from New Moon had ever gone barefoot to school. Excuse me, I just have to have a drink. A certain sector of society believed that children with no shoes were poor, and so therefore they didn't want to have their children or children associated with them thought of as being poor because it was a slight on them. And I'm guessing that that's part of what it is. My own mother, when she came back from Canada when she was quite young, had thought that the children in New Zealand were very poor because they were running around in bare feet. That was just the way she had grown up when she was in Canada before they came back to New Zealand, because she was born in England, then went to Canada, and before she came to New Zealand, she had thought that New Zealand children were poor because they had no shoes on, not understanding that New Zealand children at the time commonly ran around without shoes on, regardless of whether or not you had money for shoes. In fact, I remember going to school and taking my shoes off as soon as I could when I got there. Unfortunately, that meant there were a few lost shoes. Because when you're about 7 or even 10, you don't necessarily remember where you put them down and left them because you took them off when you're in the middle of doing something interesting. There you go. Now, Aunt Elizabeth had told her that no child from New Moon had ever gone barefoot to school. "Oh, just look at the baby apron," laughed another girl with a head of chestnut curls. Now Emily flushed. This was indeed the vulnerable point in her armour. Delighted at her success in drawing blood, the curled one tried again. "Is that your grandmother's sunbonnet?" There was a chorus of giggles. Oh, she wears a sunbonnet to save her complexion, said a bigger girl. That's the Murray pride. The Murrays are rotten with pride, my mother says. You're awfully ugly, said a fat, squat little miss nearly as broad as she was long. Your ears look like a cat's. You needn't be so proud, said Black Eyes. Your kitchen ceiling isn't plastered even. And your cousin Jimmy is an idiot, said Chestnut Curls. He isn't, cried Emily. He has more sense than any of you. You can say what you like about me, but you're not going to insult my family. If you say one more word about them, I'll look you over with the evil eye. Nobody understood what this threat meant, but that made it all the more effective. It produced a brief silence. Then the baiting began again in a different form. Can you sing? Asked a thin, freckled girl who had yet contrived to be very pretty in spite of thinness and freckles. No, said Emily. Can you dance? No. Can you sew? No. Can you cook? No. Can you knit lace? No. Can you crochet? No. Then what can you do? Said the freckled one in a contemptuous tone. I can write poetry, said Emily without in the least meaning to say it. But at that instant she knew she could write poetry, and with this queer, unreasonable conviction came the flash. That's her moment of inspiration that happens to her, which we have had reference to several times so far, and it was something that she thought she would never see again, never have it happen again, just because of the difficulty that she was having. I'm just going to pause for a moment. The difficulty with having her had her father die. I'm just going to check to see if there is a setting in here that I need to change that might change the number of frames that are being dropped. I don't actually understand this side of it quite well enough. No. I'm thinking that there are some of the settings here that have changed since I updated it. Sorry, I'll be with you in a minute. Okay. No, that looks like it's okay. I really don't know why it's doing this. I will have to do a bit of turning it off and on again once I finish the stream. I think that's the only solution. And I think that will probably solve some of it. I really wish I'd managed to get it sorted out earlier. Let's open this up on the other computer. Yes, I do have the other computer still here. The one that I'm meant to be using because it's newer and far more capable than this one. And I'm just going to open up the things I need on it. Sorry, tickle in the throat. And that will take some of the processing pressure off the computer that I'm currently working on. And then we will get going again. Yes, all those clickings. Oh, goodness me. My hair is quite long these days, isn't it? A lot longer than I expected. Right, that one is up and going now, so that means I can turn off this one. It'll jitter for a minute. Sorry. While I'm waiting for my stream to settle down again, I'll eat some of my butter fried potato. And this should take some of the load off my computer's processor. Not me eating the butter fried potato, me closing down the browser. And I shall open up iced coffee. There you go. That's better. And look at that. Already the RAM usage and the processing is dropping. Yay. So hopefully it's not going to drop so many frames. It's not all I can do about it yet, as far as I know. But we'll see how we go. Dear. It's one of those days. Anyway, we'll carry on. I can write poetry, said Emily, without the least meaning to say it. But at that instant she knew she could write poetry, and with this queer, unreasonable conviction came the flash. Right there, surrounded by hostility and suspicion, fighting alone for her standing, without backing or advantage, came the wonderful moment when souls seemed to cast aside the bonds of flesh and spring upward to the stars. The rapture and delight on Emily's face amazed and enraged her foes. They thought it a manifestation of Murray pride in an uncommon accomplishment. You lie, said Black Eyes bluntly. A star does not lie, retorted Emily. The flash was gone, but its uplift remained. She looked them all over with a cool detachment that quelled them temporarily. Why don't you like me? She asked directly. There was no reply. Emily looked straight at Chestnut Curls and repeated her question. Chestnut Curls felt herself compelled to answer it. Because you ain't a bit like us, she muttered. I wouldn't want to be, said Emily scornfully. Oh my, you are one of the chosen people, mocked Black Eyes. Of course I am, retorted Emily. She walked away to the schoolhouse, conqueror in that battle. But the forces against her were not so easily cowed. There was much whispering and plotting after she had gone in, a conference with some of the boys, and a handing over of bedizened pencils. Ones that people have decorated, I suppose, and chews of gum for value received. Oh dear. A little bit of physical bullying about to happen on the way home from school, maybe. An agreeable sense of victory and the afterglow of the flash carried Emily through the afternoon, in spite of the fact that Miss Brownell ridiculed her for her mistakes in spelling, because she's never been taught to spell. She knows how to read, but she hasn't learnt to spell yet. Miss Brownell was very fond of ridiculing her pupils. All the girls in the class giggled except one who had not been there in the morning and was consequently at the tail. Emily had been wondering who she was. She was unlike the rest of the girls, as Emily herself. She was as unlike the rest of the girls as Emily herself. But in a totally different style. She was tall, oddly dressed in an overlong dress of faded striped print, and barefooted. Her thick hair, cut short, fluffed out all around her head in a bushy wave that seemed to be of brilliant spun gold, and her glowing eyes were of a brown so light and translucent as to be almost amber. Her mouth was large, and she had a saucy, pronounced chin. Pretty she might not be called, but her face was so vivid and mobile that Emily could not drag her fascinated eyes from it. And she was the only girl in class who did not, sometime through the lesson, get a barb of sarcasm from Miss Brownell, though she made as many mistakes as the rest of them. That's intriguing. At recess, one of the girls came up to Emily with a box in her hand. Emily knew that she was Rhoda Stewart, and thought her very pretty and sweet. Rhoda had been in the crowd around her at noon hour, but she had not said anything. She was dressed in crispy pink gingham. She had smooth, lustrous braids of sugar-brown hair, big blue eyes, a rosebud mouth, doll-like features and a sweet voice. If Miss Brownell could be said to have a favourite, it was Rhoda Stewart, and she seemed generally popular in her own set and much petted by the older girls. "Here's a present for you," she said sweetly. "Ooh, I don't trust this one." Emily took the box unsuspectingly. Rhoda's smile would have disarmed any suspicion. For a moment, Emily was happily anticipant as she removed the cover. Then, with a shriek, she flung the box from her and stood pale and trembling from head to foot. There was a snake in the box. Whether dead or alive, she did not know and did not care. For any snake, Emily had a horror and repulsion she could not overcome. The very sight of one almost paralysed her. A chorus of giggles ran round the porch. "Before I'd be so scared of an old dead snake," scoffed Black Eyes. "Can you write poetry about that?" giggled Chestnut Girls. "I hate you! I hate you!" cried Emily. "You are mean, hateful girls." "Calling names isn't ladylike," said the freckled one. "I thought a Murray would be too grand for that." "If you come to school tomorrow, Miss Starr," said Black Eyes deliberately, "we are going to take that snake and put it around your neck." "Let me see you do it," cried a clear, ringing voice. Into their midst, with a bound, came the girl with amber eyes and short hair. "Just let me see you do it, Jenny Strang." "This isn't any of your business, Ilse Burnley. "This isn't any of your business, Ilse Burnley," muttered Jenny sullenly. "Oh, isn't it? Don't you sass me, piggy eyes." Ilse walked up to the retreating Jenny and shook a sunburned fist in her face. "If I catch you teasing Emily Starr tomorrow with that snake again, I'll take it by the tail and you by your tail and slash you across the face with it. Mind that, piggy eyes. Now go and pick up that precious snake of yours and throw it down on the ash pile." Jenny actually went and did it. Ilse faced the others. "Clear out, all of you, and leave the New Moon girl alone after this," she said. "If I hear of any more meddling and sneaking, I'll slit your throats and rip out your hearts and tear your eyes out. Yes, and I'll cut off your ears and wear 'em pinned on my dress." Cowed by these ferocious threats, or by something in Ilse's personality, Emily's persecutors drifted away. Ilse turned to Emily. "Don't mind them," she said contemptuously. "They're jealous of you, that's all. Jealous because you live at New Moon and ride in a fringe-top buggy and wear buttoned boots. You smack their mugs if they give you any more of their jaw." Ilse vaulted the fence and tore off into the maple bush without any glance at Emily. Only Rhoda Stewart remained. So the maple bush is a scrubby bit of land that's mainly made up of maple trees. That's what they mean by, it's not a single bush type tree that is a maple. It's actually just an area of land that's rough. It's been cleared at some stage, probably, and then it's all just grown back as wild stuff. Only Rhoda Stewart remained. "Emily, I'm awfully sorry," she said, rolling her big blue eyes appealingly. "I didn't know there was a snake in that box. Cross my heart, I didn't. The girls just told me it was a present for you. You're not mad at me, are you? Because I like you." Emily had been mad and hurt and outraged, but this little bit of friendliness melted her instantly. In a moment, she and Rhoda had their arms around each other, parading across the playground. "I'm going to ask Miss Brownell to let you sit with me," said Rhoda. "I used to sit with Annie Gregg, but she's moved away. You'd like to sit with me, wouldn't you?" "I'd love it," said Emily warmly. She was as happy as she had been miserable. Here was the friend of her dreams. Already she worshipped Rhoda. "We ought to sit together," said Rhoda importantly. "We belong to the two best families in Blairwater. Do you know that if my father had his rights, he would be on the throne of England?" "England," said Emily, too amazed to be anything but an echo. Yes, we are descended from the kings of Scotland, said Rhoda, so of course we don't associate with everybody. My father keeps store and I'm taking music lessons. Is your Aunt Elizabeth going to give you music lessons? I don't know. She ought to. She's very rich, isn't she? I don't know, said Emily again. She wished Rhoda would not ask such questions. Emily thought it was hardly good manners, but surely a descendant of the Stuart kings ought to know the rules of breeding if anybody did. She's got an awful temper, hasn't she? Asked Rhoda. No, she hasn't, cried Emily. Well, she nearly killed your cousin Jimmy in one of her rages, said Rhoda. That's true. Mother told me. Why doesn't your Aunt Laura get married? Has she got a beau? What wages does your Aunt Elizabeth pay your cousin Jimmy? I don't know. Well, said Rhoda, rather disappointedly, I suppose you haven't been at New Moon long enough to find things out. But it must be very different from what you've been used to, I guess. Your father was as poor as a church mouse, wasn't he? Oh my goodness, the gossip that's obviously gone on in this village. My father was a very, very rich man, said Emily deliberately. Rhoda stared. I thought he hadn't a cent. Neither he had, but people can be rich without money. I don't see how, but anyhow, you'll be rich some day. Your Aunt Elizabeth will likely leave you all her money, Mother says, so I don't care if you are living on charity. I love you, and I'm going to stick up for you. Have you a beau, Emily? No, said Emily, blushing violently and even quite scandalised at the idea. I'm only 11. Oh, everybody in our class has a beau. Mine is Teddy Kent. I shook hands with him after I'd counted 9 stars for 9 nights without missing a night. If you do that, the first boy you shake hands with afterwards is to be your beau. But it's awful hard to do. It took me all winter. Teddy wasn't in school today. He's been sick all June. He's the best-looking boy in Blairwater. You'll have to have a beau too, Emily. I won't, declared Emily angrily. I don't know a thing about beaux, and I won't have one. Rhoda tossed her head. Oh, I suppose you think there's nobody good enough for you living at New Moon. Well, you won't be able to play clap in, clap out if you haven't a beau. Emily knew nothing about the mysteries of clap in and clap out, and didn't care. Anyway, she wasn't going to have a beau, and she repeated this in such decided tones that Rhoda deemed it wise to drop the subject. Now, beau, B-E-A-U, or plural beaux, B-E-A-U-X, from French. And I think originally it was actually meant beautiful or something like that, but in this context, it's like a boyfriend. There you go. She repeated this in such decided tones that Rhoda deemed it wise to drop the subject. Emily was rather glad when the bell rang. Miss Brownell granted Rhoda's request quite graciously, and Emily transferred her goods and chattels to Rhoda's seat. Rhoda whispered a good deal during the last hour, and Emily got scolded for it, but didn't mind. I'm going to have a birthday party the first week in July, and I'm going to invite you if your aunts will let you come. I'm not going to have Ilse Burnley, though. Don't you like her? No, she's an awful tomboy, and then her father is an infidel, and so's she. She always spells God with a little G in her dictation. Miss Brownell scolds her for it, but she does it right along. Miss Brownell won't whip her because she's setting her cap for Dr. Burnley, but Ma says she won't get him because he hates women. I don't think it's proper to associate with such people. Ilse is an awful wild, queer girl and has an awful temper. So has her father. She doesn't chum with anybody. Isn't it ridiculous, the way she wears her hair? You ought to have a bang, Emily. They're all the rage, and you'd look well with one because you've such a high forehead. So bang is like a fringe. We don't call it a bang or bangs in New Zealand. Well, didn't when I was a kid. It would make a real beauty of you. My, but you have lovely hair, and your hands are just lovely. All the Murrays have pretty hands, and you have the sweetest eyes, Emily. Emily had never received so many compliments in her life. Rhoda laid Flattery on with a trowel. Her head was quite turned and she went home from school, determined to ask Aunt Elizabeth to cut her hair in a bang. If it would make a beauty of her, it must be compassed somehow. And she would also ask Aunt Elizabeth if she might wear her Venetian beads to school next day. The other girls may respect me more then, she thought. She was alone at the crossroads. She was alone from the crossroads, where she had parted company with Rhoda, and she reviewed the events of the day with a feeling that, after all, she had kept the star flag flying, except for a temporary reverse in the matter of the snake. School was very different from what she had expected it to be, but that was the way in life. She had heard Ellen Green say, and you just had to make the best of it. Rhoda was a darling, and there was something about Ilse Burnley that one liked. And as for the rest of the girls, Emily got square with them by pretending she saw them all being hanged in a row for frightening her to death with a snake, and felt no more resentment towards them, although some of the things that had been said to her rankled bitterly in her heart for many a day. She had no father to tell them to, which is what she used to do when things upset her, and no account book to write them out in, so she could not exorcise them. She used to write descriptions of things, even made up stories about them, to sort of take revenge on people that had upset her. But when Aunt Elizabeth had demanded to be able to read it because she shouldn't have secrets from Aunt Elizabeth, Emily had thrown it in the fire and it had been burnt up, so she no longer has a composition book of her own that she can write all her imaginary things in. I wonder if she's going to get another book somehow. We'll find out eventually. She had no speedy chance to ask for a bang, for there was company at New Moon and her aunts were busy getting ready an elaborate supper. But when the preserves were brought on, Emily snatched the opportunity of a lull in the older conversation. Preserves, tinned fruit or canned fruit or preserved fruit used as a dessert, I would guess. Aunt Elizabeth, she said, can I have a bang? Aunt Elizabeth looked her disdain. No, she said, I do not approve of bangs. Of all the silly fashions that have come in nowadays, bangs are the silliest. Oh, Aunt Elizabeth, do let me have a bang. It would make a beauty of me. Rhoda says so. It would take a good deal more than a bang to do that. Emily, we will not have bangs at New Moon except on the molly cows. They are the only creatures that should wear bangs. It's a particular type of cow that they have there that naturally has a long fringe on the front. I wonder if they're Highland cattle. Aunt Elizabeth smiled triumphantly around the table. Aunt Elizabeth did smile sometimes when she thought she had silenced some small person by exquisite ridicule. Emily understood that it was no use to hope for bangs. Loveliness did not lie that way for her. It was mean of Aunt Elizabeth, mean. She heaved a sigh of disappointment and dismissed the idea for the present. There was something else she wanted to know. Why doesn't Ilse Burnley's father believe in God? She asked. Because of the trick her mother played him. No, somebody else. Sorry, wrong voice. Because of the trick her mother played him, said Mr. Slade with a chuckle. Mr. Slade was a fat, jolly-looking old man with bushy hair and whiskers. He had already said some things Emily could not understand and which had seemed greatly to embarrass his very ladylike wife. What trick did Ilse's mother play? Asked Emily, all agog with interest. Now Aunt Laura looked at Aunt Elizabeth, and Aunt Elizabeth looked at Aunt Laura. Then the latter said, run out and feed the chickens, Emily. Sorry, that was Aunt Laura, not Aunt Elizabeth. Emily rose with dignity. You might just as well tell me that Ilse's mother isn't to be talked about, and I would obey you. I understand perfectly what you mean, she said as she left the table. So, trying to speak above a child's head effectively because something was considered inappropriate. Oops, sorry, I wonder what was that. Something fell over down there. Something from my computer. I'm just trying to get the charge cable. And that's the end of that chapter. Oh man, today is just such a weird combination of things happening. My iPad mini is nearly flat on battery, and thankfully I just noticed it. My computer is being weird, and it's still dropping frames very badly, and I don't know why. It's one of those days. And the next chapter is very long, and I'm thinking, because of the way my throat is still tickly, that it really would not be a good idea to continue reading. I'm very sorry, but today is going to be a short reading day. So, poor Emily, new school, never having been to school before, so she has no idea what the dynamics can be like at school, although she's now discovered them. Oh my goodness, poor thing. Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear. Not a good experience for her. Being picked on and bullied by the others at school. And it must be the boys that provided the snake. I wonder if the boys are going to get upset with the girls because their snake got thrown away into the ash heap. Oh, that would be interesting, wouldn't it? I wonder. Sorry, I've just got to look at something here and deal with it. On my other computer. I was really, really hoping that that by closing my browser, so there was less happening on my computer, that it would actually sort its brain out, but it hasn't. And I'm so disappointed. But I think I need to have another go at resetting some things on the actual program because it didn't update. And I probably am also due for my computer to be restarted, which I don't do as often as I should just because the old computer has issues. Yes. Do you have a computer with issues? It's a sad but factual thing that happens for some of us. This one's issues, apart from the fact that its brain is really just too old and tired, is for a long time when you go to restart it, you have to unplug everything that is with a USB plug. Everything that's plugged into the computer using one of these. You have to unplug it, which includes the keyboard, restart the computer. Well, you actually tell it to start restarting and then unplug everything. Restart the computer and then hit the reset button, which is an additional restart button. We used to use it a lot in the old days. And then once it gets to Windows is loading screen, then you can plug your USBs in. Because otherwise, if you leave them all plugged in when it's restarting, it doesn't even get that far. It cannot load to Windows if there's anything plugged into the USBs, which means there's something wrong in its brain, in the hardware part of its brain. Anyway, it's just sad. We'll get there. Eventually, I will get onto the other computer properly. I'll be able to stream from it, and then it won't have any of these problems. And I don't think I'm going to have any problems with dropped frames either if that happens, if I get it working properly. So I'm going to have to leave you here wondering what happens next. I will give you a hint. Chapter 9 is called A Special Providence. I'm also going to work on trying to get the lighting sorted out. I don't know what's wrong with that. It's really weird. Anyway, so thank you for being here. It's been great having you here. You've been a very quiet bunch today, but that's okay. Sometimes it's like that. And we'll see you next time. And in the meantime, happy reading. Bye.